Well, welcome back, everybody. This is the final episode of what has been an amazing run so far. Accolades are going out across the face of the earth for this little series that I put together. Praise has been heaped upon us. We've done it. We've made it. This is the real deal. Accept no cheap imitations. It's SJJMAS, the final show, number 35. And I've got Colin Liddell. Colin, thanks for being the final guest of SJJMAS.
Well, yeah, it's a great honour to fill the final slot on SJJMAS.
Indeed.
I'm really lost for words. I don't know what to say.
Well, at least you appreciate the gravity of the moment. So, I know there was a banquet that you could be attending instead of coming here. But yeah.
Yeah, well, I think one of the reasons why SJJMAS has been an acknowledged success is it's because we're not trying too hard. It's got that kind of casual feel to it.
Yeah, there's something lost. Look, everybody knows my criticisms of, look, whatever. If you love Millennial Woes and Millennial, I'm not here to knock it, but my criticisms are that when you start to take yourself a bit too seriously, you lose something is lost within it, and you see there's people huff their own farts a bit too much. Who knows? Maybe I'll start doing it. Fuck knows. I expect all of you to keep me grounded if that ever starts to happen and pull me down, knock me down a peg or two. All right. That's the deal I have with you.
I'm sure Millennial was a bit more casual and easygoing when it first started out. So you've got to really be on your guard against that happening 10 years down the line.
Yeah, definitely. I feel the pressure. I've already feel the pressure a bit to like conform to what I think my guest wants, but I mean it's a difficult line to walk as to how to do like a natural off the cuff interview and ask the questions that the audience is wanting answers to whilst not being a dickhead to anybody. So, and this is like my first time doing it, so I don't know how I've done. It seems to have gone all right.
Yeah, the main thing is not to think about it too much. Just do it, and let everybody else think about it and worry about it.
Yeah, don't overthink it. That's it. Don't overthink it. That's it. So, Colin, one of the things you said,
it's not going to change the world, is it? SJJMAS, is it?
What?
It's not going to change.
So? Oh my God, bro!
Well, if you thought it was going to change the world, then you wouldn't be able to do it, would you? So ironically, by thinking it's meaningless, it might actually become meaningful.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Look, when you become this, when you insert yourself into things, that's when everything goes to shit. So if you think you're the star of the show, that can never be a good thing. Whilst ever it's just about, bring some interesting people on, do some alternative entertainment, not take ourselves too seriously. That's always going to be the attraction of popping over here versus something else, isn't it? Something else. So,
yeah.
But anyway, Colin, I've got you on. We're on the final show. You suggested we do a rundown of the year, remind people of what's gone on. So what is the first thing on your mind of this 2024 year?
Well, I was just going through the months, seeing what happened in the various months of the year that's just gone by. And looking back at January, I remember that somebody very, very important sadly passed away in a Ukrainian prison. I was wondering if you'd know who that would be.
Navalny.
A Ukrainian prison, I said.
Oh, in a Ukrainian prison. Coach Red Pill.
That's the guy. Yep.
Yes, Gonzalo Lira, our Gonzo. Yeah. What?
So obviously a victim of this the tyrannical Zelensky state.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on that? Seeing as you brought him up, um, I
Well,
actually, yeah,
yeah,
go
well,
on.
I do think it was just he was incredibly unhealthy by all accounts. I think he was a chain
Yes.
smoker. He didn't look after himself. He was always on the internet. I mean, if you're
Mm,
always online, you're not going to be very healthy. Let's put it that way. So if you're a
mm.
full-time Kremlin shill, tweeting and live streaming all the time, it's really bad for your health.
Yeah, when they found him, the photographs of the place where he was living emerged on the internet, and it looked like his toilet had been flushed for months, and so he was living in squalor. Looked like he didn't like shower. Really quite shocking state actually when they arrested him. Um,
So he would have died anyway, I reckon. If he'd stayed at home, or whether he was in prison or at home, I think the result would have been the same.
well, this is part of the law that people suspect that he kind of ended up. It's called a crashing out in modern lingo, now in modern parlance, to crash out. That he ended up doing this because he'd been told by the doctors that he had like this heart condition and it would probably kill him within 5 years anyway. So, and he'd mentioned something about this, but it was gonzo, so people didn't really believe him. They thought he was just saying it for attention, but I guess maybe in hindsight it was true.
Yeah, he should have listened to his doctors, or I don't know, just changed his life. And I guess he just got caught up in the excitement of what was going on because
Mm,
nobody really expected Putin to invade the Ukraine besides Putin. And once it kicked off, it was going to be all over in 3 days, and then it wasn't over in 3 days, and then there are all these
mm,
interesting twists and turns, and the whole thing has kind of been on a bit of a knife edge. I mean, it's always been at the point where you think either Ukraine's going to collapse militarily or Russia's going to collapse economically. So it's got that kind of it's not a very one-sided predictable war, and so it keeps
mm.
people very, very emotionally engaged for that very reason, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he found himself in the middle of it purely by accident, and in many ways, just to, like keep it on Coach for a second, Coach Red Pill. It actually reinvigorated what was basically a dead brand and a dead channel, and brought him back to uh, you know preeminence, I guess you could say, in this like current thing that was happening. So I mean, we can look back and say obviously it ended badly for him. He ended up dead, but to him at the time, and we can like criticize everything, and obviously he was spewing, in my opinion, and I think yours, vile propaganda for an aggressive army. But I know he was like, it was good for his brand, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Well, yeah, he's kind of secured his place as a footnote in history, which is probably the most that any of us
Yeah,
can hope for.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Do you want to say anything more about the war in Ukraine at this point?
Well,
Or,
it is interesting that a few weeks after that, in a sense, he was kind of avenged, you could say, because somebody else died this time in a Russian prison.
and is that wait? Oh, and that would be Navalny.
That would be Navalny, yeah. So yeah, you could if you place it on the timeline, Coach Red Pill gets cruelly done to death in a Ukrainian
Mm,
prison by probably being given a bar of soap for the first time in several months. And then
mm,
a few weeks later, this tragic. I guess most people now think it was literally an assassination of Navalny in a Siberian prison.
Yeah, I mean, do you think so? Probably so, right? Putin getting rid of his enemies?
Yeah, well, it was. I think it was an assassination mainly because that's the kind of thing Putin does anyway, and secondly, there was an election coming up in Russia, and I think Putin probably, obviously it's a fake election when it's held in Russia, and Putin kind of felt a little bit uncomfortable holding a fake election with the sort of presence of Navalny kind of in the background. So I think he just wanted to put that out of people's minds. And so that's probably the motivation, just to kill off that idea that there could be any alternative to what he was offering the voters.
Yeah. What was Navalny? I know very little about him. Was he a Western shitlib? I think I had Phil on the other day who told me, no, he was a bit of a nationalist, really, and like the West wouldn't kind of liked him anyway.
Well, it's hard to really, place everybody in a kind of Western context because that's not. I guess by Russian standards, he was like a Russian shitlib, which probably means he's more right wing than the Tory party or most of the Republican Party in America, and but also like Russia's a different kind of political environment, and so you've got to take certain positions anyway. You've got to be patriotic. You've got to believe in the big Russia. Otherwise you'll lose a lot of normie votes. So I'm not really sure where he was truly. What did he believe in his heart of hearts? It's hard to say, but he was operating in a Russian political context. So that would, skew him in a more kind of right wing or nationalist direction anyway.
Yeah. Do you think that elections have been fake in Russia since Putin came to power? And what about Putin's original coming to power? Was that orchestrated too? Have the Russian people ever had a voice, a real one?
I think they had a bit of a voice in the 90s. And even then, I think there were people, the oligarchs, the old deep state, who were already manipulating things, intimidating politicians, etc., etc. And once Putin got his feet under the table, then it was we saw some very high level manipulation of the so-called Russian democratic system. You had fake opposition. Zhirinovsky, do you remember him?
No. Who's that?
Zhirinovsky was this. Actually, his party was called the Liberal Party or something similar, but he was an out-and-out nutcase nationalist who wanted to, extend the borders of Russia to the Indian Ocean and daft things like that. He'd just say whatever came into his head, really, and he used to take all these ultra-populist positions, and he was there to essentially make Putin look like a calm, sensible, middle-of-the-road person. And then, of course, the other thing that the other fake opposition were the Communist Party. And so the Communist Party, is still in existence. It's allowed to participate in elections. But again, that's, most people don't want to return to the dark old days of, food shortages and bread queues and so on. So they're not going to vote for the Communist Party. So, Putin sort of positions himself as this middle of the road, common sense, man of the people, decent Russian nationalist guy. And then on the right, you've got this loony Zhirinovsky spouting his claptrap and good entertainment for some people. And then on the other side, you've got the Communist Party trying to creep back into power and reintroduce a cardboard as the national diet.
Bayere says, technically speaking, Putin is a liberal. I've also heard this view in the West as well. What is your take on that?
In a way, he is, because he justifies his power in the same way that liberal parties do. He's going to push up GDP. He's going to improve living standards. It's all about improving the material life of Russians, having a nice kind of consumeristic version of the West, but in Russia. So essentially, ideologically, you could say it is a form of materialism, liberalism, consumerism, but politically, it's a lot more deep state, a lot more complicated than the sort of naive way we have of choosing our leaders.
Yeah, I have a friend who calls it a police state. Is that an accurate description?
There is an element of it being a police state, but most Russians, I think it's a kind of like. I think Vlad Vlexer's quite right in that it's
just going to ask you about him. Yeah.
Yeah, I think his analysis is right. It's all about depoliticizing the normies. The normies have this kind of Faustian bargain with their leaders, in this case Putin, and the bargain is they just let Putin get on with running the country, and in return he tries to ensure that they're okay. They get what they need. They have jobs. They have enough money to spend. The shops aren't empty, and they don't have to go off and die in the war. Even this is the thing. Putin tries to avoid out-and-out conscription, which you think there's a war going on. Why doesn't he just conscript enough soldiers to win the war? That's part of the deal. The Russian people don't want to be conscripted. So if you're somebody living in Moscow or St. Petersburg, probably you're all right. And he uses the dregs of society to fill the army. We saw that with Prigozhin and these prison battalions that he raised. We see this with all these kind of weird ethnic groups that get pushed into joining the army in one way and another. But the normal mainstream Russian normie is not really threatened too much with the prospect of dying in a meat wave attack in the Ukraine.
Yeah, some of these battalions that I see like posted on Telegram and that, when I see the photo of them, it looks like something out of Lord of the Rings. I mean, some of these people, I don't know where he's dragging them up from, but yeah.
Well, it's these odd Eurasian groups that fill a lot of the ranks of the Russian army. These people like these Buryats and Tartars and Chechens, and now we've got the Koreans. It's really
that's wild.
I mean, it's really a very, very advanced form of multiculturalism.
So, do you think Russia is a multi-ethnic? This is what my other friend. I know we've got a couple of people who are pro-Ukrainian here talking about Russia again, but I mean that's just the way it is. I mean that's what we think. But my friend says it's a multi-ethnic empire waging like a war against the whitest country in Europe, and he's shocked that the DR are just so blasé about it. It's either it's like 90% either turn the other cheek or it's actually a good thing. They think, bizarrely.
Yeah, well, I think Russia, in a way, Ukraine is Russia as well. The Ukrainians are, more or less, essentially not that different from the Russians. They just represent a different form of Russianness, I think. And what Ukraine really represents is Russia has a kind of multipolarity. It's like Russia's this huge, vast, sweeping kind of civilization, and it includes a lot of different groups, and it includes quite a lot of different types of Russian. In fact, setting aside all these weird Siberian tribes that most people have never heard of. And the Ukrainians are like a kind of multipolar form of Russianness. They've got their own local part of Russia, and they want to run it their way. They don't want to be controlled from the center. And, Russia is a kind of essentially a reaction to the Mongols. Because if you look back at Russian history, if you go back to the Mongols basically overran Russia in the 13th century. If you go back before the 13th century, the rise of Genghis Khan, etc., Russia was multipolar. There were all these different Russian states. There was, Kiev, and then there was Novgorod and so on. And, Moscow wasn't really much of a, state in those days. It was just multipolar. And it was probably better for that because, if you think about running everything from the center, you have to get all the decisions made in Moscow. And, you have to go thousands of miles to, actually, to the center of power for things to happen. You can imagine how inefficient that could be.
Yes. I always forget how large it was. I've just put it on the screen for perspective, how large Russia actually is. I mean, it dwarfs China. Yeah.
Well, that's the Mercator projection. It's which greatly exaggerates the size of Russia, but it is larger than China, but not by as much as you think from that map.
Okay, so that map's not accurate, but it does cover effectively west to east, all across the top of the Eurasian continent. I mean, we call Asia and Europe separate continents, but they are not, in fact. I don't know if there's a fault line between them. So it is a vast ethnic empire. And people who come from the very north and northeast are effectively Asian people, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, if they're indigenous, they are.
Yeah. Let me just get this quick super chat in. Jord asks, is Colin a Virgo or a Libra? Thank you, Jord.
They're neither.
Thanks for that, Jord. Appreciate it. So, where do you stand then on the current status of the war in Ukraine, since we're talking about it? Are they at an impasse? Is this going to get? Do you think it's going to get wrapped up soon? Is Putin going to pull the rug on funding? Is Trump about to pull the rug on funding and force the Ukraine to take a deal, which will probably be where the battle lines are currently drawn, or what? How do you see this playing out?
I think it'll just turn into a frozen conflict, and there's lots of precedents for that. North Korea and South Korea. Some of the other things that Putin has set up, like South Ossetia and Abkhazia, and that thing in Moldova. So I think it'll be a frozen conflict. With Trump coming in, people are a bit sick of the war. A lot of people have got killed. It's been pretty devastating for the Russians and their economy. The cost in human life doesn't really bother somebody like Putin. But, if you think about somebody like Zelensky, who's democratically elected and has to try to retain a degree of popularity, he has to think about all the Ukrainians who've lost their lives in this war. So I think they're going to kick the can down the road. They're going to probably go for a ceasefire. They're not going to recognize the Russian gains. Putin's going to, occupy parts of the Ukraine. He's going to pass that off as a triumph to his own population. So that's maybe acceptable to him. But Russia's going to still face all these economic sanctions. And, it's not really clear what will happen from that. Will this weaken Putin? Will his political position be undermined by the continuation of this situation as a kind of Cold War version? And so that's the way I see it going at the moment. That's the kind of direction uh, Trump probably wants to push in as well. It is a bit tricky for Trump to deal with. I think Trump's more likely to throw his weight behind Israel and look to topple the people in Iran. I think because I think he can get more easier results there.
Yeah. Well, on just on the Ukraine thing, Trump says he's going to end the war on day one. This has been like his long-standing pledge. Do you think that's just bluster?
Well, probably it's going to be at least a 3 day operation.
Uh, people tell me that this has been like the best thing that Russia's ever done. They've, obviously, it's just like Western propaganda. The sanctions haven't hurt them. In fact, it's made it better for Russia. It's like the economy is better than ever. It's just Russia needed to withdraw itself from the Western system anyway. This has like made Russia more nationalistic. It's better for them, and we just don't see it. What do you think about that?
Well, it's an interesting point of view.
It's strengthened BRICS as well. This is the other one that I get. That we're now entering into de-dollarization. The multipolar world is real, and it's the worst thing that America's ever done is back in
Well,
Ukraine because it's
I
created a
think
stronger Russia.
I think Russia was doing quite a good job undermining the West before the war started. And I think this has kind of brought a lot of things out into the open. So they've kind of showed their hand. And, they were playing quite a clever and effective meta-political game, I think, for several years. And
Yeah.
I was very much aware of it, through the alt-right and what was going on in there. And there are certain trends towards multipolarity going on in the world. That's undeniable. The rise of China, India becoming a massive economy as well. And also America is, still it's a major economy, but America's not really as big a political entity as it is a economic entity. And I think the reason for that is that, a country like China or a country like Russia, power is very, very centralized and the deep state is very, very deep. And these countries can do whatever their leaders want them to do. Whereas a country like America, it's completely different. Power is incredibly decentralized. The president is, hemmed in by checks and balances. There's the Supreme Court to worry about. There's the Congress and the Senate. There's the various states. There's the legal process. So the president has very, very, very limited power. And so a country like China or Russia can almost be politically as powerful as a country like America, even if America has an economy that is, 7 or 8 times bigger. And right now, with China, America's economy is not really that much bigger.
Okay, so do you give some weight to the potential for China to overtake America economically too? Then that's interesting.
Well, what I'm saying is everything was kind of set up to move in a certain direction. But when Putin decided to invade the Ukraine back in 2022,
Yeah.
that threatened to derail everything. What he did, he made his position much more brittle. And so
Okay. Okay.
he's actually kind of hollowed out Russian power to a large degree by, basically,
Yeah.
shit in the bed in this case. And so
So
I
you're
think,
talking about the soft power that Russia had around the world was very underestimated and kind of not noticed around the world, and now it's all obvious, and even they've like put up sanctions and things against it, right? Am I reading right?
Yes, and also there wasn't that consciousness before. Before, Russian
Yeah.
money could move freely across the West, and we saw a lot of it moving into London, and we saw a lot of it moving into the Conservative Party's coffers, even, and we saw people connected to the KGB being made members of the House of Lords, and this is another part of Boris's rich political legacy, as mayor of London and so on. And so, all this was going on, and a lot of people were just, quietly on the take, and they were happy to go along with it. And now that's a lot more difficult. And so, we've exposed,
Yes.
or the Russians have kind of exposed themselves really by playing all these cards, often in desperation.
Yeah, I've heard that term from you before, that Putin shat the bed. So I guess you think his play was not calculated to last this long. He didn't expect Ukraine to fight back, and he didn't foresee this, which is what the Russia shills tell me. Oh no, it was always Putin always knew that it would be a slugfest. This is what Russia is best at: the long war. They're in it for the long game. Your position is no, it's kind of been a big mess.
Yeah, I mean, the Russians are, let's face it, not very good at war. I mean, there's this kind of boomer mindset that the Russians are these, great macho heroes of war, and they defeated the Nazis and blah, 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 and all this rubbish. And when you actually look into the military record of the Russian army, it's pretty shit, really. I mean, look at Chechnya.
Chechnya, Afghanistan. What was the other one? Japan.
Exactly, yeah.
World War
So,
Two only because America helped them.
yeah, and because the Germans didn't have any gasoline, so
So you don't
honestly,
believe it's inevitable that Russia's going to win this if the wet. Let's imagine Trump doesn't pull funding. Trump actually goes rah rah Ukraine because Putin, I don't know, refuses to be reasonable or something, and so America says fuck you, I'm going to keep funding Ukraine. Then do you think Ukraine could actually get a victory? And
well,
what would that even look like?
well, yeah, I mean, it's all depends on how much pain they can inflict, and the great strength of Russia is you can inflict a lot of pain on their army, but it doesn't really transmit through to the broader society. They're quite happy to see all these meat wave attacks come to grief. They don't really care that much about all these dead bodies. I mean, that is Russia's superpower, so to speak. But eventually, the economic costs, the social discontent that's being brewed by all this, I think eventually that could curdle and sour things for Putin.
Yes, I think from Vlad Vexler, what I've heard talked about is a future where Russia breaks up into smaller pieces, or and this would inevitably require, I guess, a toppling of Putin of some kind, whatever that entails. Is this the alternate scenario that could lead to a Ukrainian in quotes victory that basically they're playing for, in your opinion, or is it more of a conventional win?
Well, I think it's not a straightforward military situation. It is an economic and a geopolitical situation, and I think a lot of it depends on what's in the best interests of China as well. And
You think
China
Russia's
is,
become a vassal state of China?
well, it's become increasingly dependent on China, and it's sort of burnt its boats with the West, so to speak. it's very hard for Russia to have a kind of healthy economic relationship with Europe and the United States. And so they're kind of forced to, really depend on China and India to a lesser degree in a way that also means that they're kind of politically dependent. And, at some point, China might think that, Putin's played out, it's not going to, he's done what he can do. He's not going to make things any better. It's going to start creating negative blowback for China, and it might be time to pull the plug on him. So something like that could happen. The Chinese might decide that there's somebody else who needs to take over in Russia, and that might then happen. So, and he is quite old, Putin. I mean, obviously I guess he ages reasonably well. He's not too paunchy or wrinkly yet. But I think he is in his mid-70s.
Asian features. And,
yeah. But there's a point when the Asian people become really, really old.
Yeah, they look young for a long time, and then suddenly overnight they age for about 20 years.
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
He'll wake up one morning and he'll look like 150, So. And then the Chinese are thinking, no, he's got to go. Bullet in the head.
Oh, my God, yeah. What is your take on China, then? Is China the next... if it's not going to be like World War III with Russia, is China the real next conflict coming? I mean, there's all talk about this, that America really has to position itself, for conflict with China over Taiwan. Do you see any signs of this coming?
Well, yeah. What I say, we're hearing a lot from Trump about, Europe needs to spend more money on defense. Trump was coming up with some ridiculous line that the European members of NATO have to up their spending to 5%. And to me, that just sounded absurd, because the country that really has to increase its defense spending is America. Because all the European NATO countries are not involved in the Pacific region. I mean, we have to worry about is this enfeebled, weakened, bled white Russia. And I think we could, as long as we're unified, the European nations, they can fend off Russia militarily with 1% military spending. So we could actually get away with cutting our military spending. The Americans, however, have decided to involve themselves in the Pacific, which means that they're head-to-head with China. And to do that effectively, the Americans will have to spend a lot more money on their defense budget. Now, the problem here is that America has decided that it wants to challenge China over Taiwan. And there are economic reasons for that. Of course, I mean, everybody knows that all these computer chips are made in Taiwan.
Yes.
And due to that economic reality, America thinks we can't really just let the Chinese, take it over without a struggle. But I mean, in a way, China has every right to take over Taiwan, because we've admitted that Taiwan is part of China.
Oh, have we?
Yeah, all the Western countries back in back in the 1970s. Back in the 1970s, there used to be what was called Red China and Free China, and Free China was just Taiwan, and Taiwan was actually a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. And then Nixon, Kissinger, those people, they decided that they needed China to put pressure on the Soviet Union. So they did a deal. They said, okay, China, we'll recognize communist China as the real China, and we'll take away our recognition of Taiwan. And so
Okay.
Taiwan lost its seat in the Security Council, and it lost a lot of other privileges. And China then became this important global power recognized by the West. And part of the deal was that Taiwan was recognized as an integral part of China. And back then it wasn't really such a big problem because most of the computer chips in the going into the 80s and the 90s, most of the computer chips were still being made in Japan. But from the 90s onwards, it switched to Taiwan. It switched to Taiwan because Taiwan was more conveniently located for the Chinese Chinese industry, because all these computer chips are basically going into Chinese-made products.
Yeah.
So this is all the result of this ridiculous Chimerica economic relationship that started in the 90s. So America made this incredibly strategic weakness in full view, in complete daylight, and then it's because of that it sort of put itself in this position where it feels it has to defend this part of China that is not yet part of China. You know, I mean, it's like if the Isle of Wight was separate from the United Kingdom, and every country recognized the Isle of Wight as part of the United Kingdom, but they wouldn't let the British government control it. That's the kind of situation you face with China and Taiwan.
Yeah, so do you think that the current Taiwan is legitimately independent and they don't want China to rule over them, or don't you give any kind of credence to that whatsoever? Or are they like rebels just in waiting? Or what's the Taiwanese perspective on it?
I mean, you could make a case that Taiwan is distinct and different, and it's a democratic country. And how can a democratic country be subsumed into a tyrannical communist or sort of semi-fascist state? Blah blah blah. But we don't make that case. The case that we make is we don't want to fight a war over Taiwan. We want to recognize it as part of China, but we want China to kind of peacefully reunite with Taiwan. So we've created we've created one of these positions of strategic ambiguity, and I think that's very dangerous. I think that's going to, when you have a situation of strategic ambiguity, you can be sure that different people are going to understand it in different ways, and the Chinese are going to understand it in a very Chinese way. And we're gonna misunderstand it in our own way as well. We're gonna see it as this brave little freedom fighter island, blah blah blah. Plucky little Taiwan. Let's help them out. And then we might, on the basis of that, very very kind of flawed and illogical position, end up in a unwanted war with China, which wouldn't be very nice.
Yeah, so the economic situation for America is really all wrapped up in that company TMSC, right? That's the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation, or whatever it's called. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. This is a huge employer. Employs just like something like 1 million people or something, and produces the most advanced chips in the world. Shouldn't then, if America can see this coming on the horizon, shouldn't it be that they pull this, basically their chip manufacturing, out back to America, and then they can, I don't know, seed this place if that's all it's about?
I mean, yeah, that's all. The obvious solution is to move the industry out, the key industry out of Taiwan. But the whole reason it's there is because of Chimerica and our over reliance upon Chinese production. And of course, now we do see a certain awareness of the problem, but we kind of walked blindly into this ridiculous situation. and it might be quite hard to move that industry out of Taiwan. But there are some moves to do that. To reshore these industries to safer locations, maybe to Japan, maybe to America. But I don't think the Americans are really. They don't seem to have the skill sets to do that. There's been a lot of focus on American skill sets recently, and that might not be one of the things that the Americans are good at, and they might require a hell of a lot of H-1B visas to even contemplate doing that. So that's going to be very tricky.
Holy cow, I hadn't even thought about that. Let's get to that a little later down the line.
Yeah.
So, I've diverted you all over the place. Do you still have a list of things you wanted to talk about from the year here? I mean,
well, we got up to February with the death of Navalny, and then we went off on a tangent.
Yeah.
Let's see, March, there's a few things on my list. Trump started backpedaling on TikTok, I remember. Trump was very, against TikTok. And then he had a meeting with some people from China, apparently. And he kind of started backpedaling quite quickly on TikTok. So that was something that was going on back in March. We also had Trump's flotation of Truth Social around about the same time. So it's kind of interesting how these things, work together.
Yeah, I mean, I think that he had a natural contract with Truth Social. It came to an end. He came back on Twitter. What do you think about the Musk partnership? Was definitely basically Musk buying Twitter and bringing Trump back into the platform and MAGA, rah, rah, right?
It looks like that. I mean, it's hard to, smoking gun prove it, but, I mean, just the way that Musk has really got behind Trump as well. I think he's thrown in about $280 million.
Or 44 billion to buy Twitter. If you think that the long game was just to buy the election.
Yeah, I mean that is also supposed to be an asset. I don't know what it's actually worth on the open market, but if you could if you could establish the value of Twitter as an asset and then subtract that from whatever he paid for it, then you could say he also donated that amount of money to back in Trump. So it does look like there is a bit of a move to back Trump with what can be considered a lot of dark money.
Well, you mentioned TikTok. TikTok, surely the conservative case against TikTok is that TikTok seeds effectively foreign subversion into our culture by just filling Zoomers' heads, basically Zoomers and now Gen Alpha's heads, with utter degeneracy, and they're hooked on it. And it's what TikTok's algorithm serves up for Westerners is like pure degeneracy and craziness and filth and probably God knows what else of politically subversive content as well. Versus in China, it basically serves up like wholesome pro-Chinese nationalistic content. Do you buy into this, and do you think there is a case for banning TikTok? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty blatant that something like TikTok and almost all other forms of social media are very convenient entry points for some kind of fourth generation warfare that's being conducted against the West. These countries have real deep states. And we don't have a deep state. We have a comparatively shallow deep state at best. And we can't really, counter these polarization, disinfo, whatever you want to call it, degeneracy promoting tactics from somebody like the Russians or the Chinese. And so I think there's this very strong case to, at least force TikTok to be US owned. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not just promoting polarization and degeneracy. It's also used to harvest all kinds of data as well. So it is very, very nefarious. And I think Trump was right to be against it. And it was rather suspicious the way that he did a 180 on that.
When you say suspicious, what do you mean? Let's hit the nail straight on the head. What's your suspicion about?
Well, I think Trump is essentially a self serving narcissist. And, I think he's incredibly corrupt. And, his real contribution to politics is to pioneer all sorts of new ways in which people can bribe him.
That's extremely cynical. Don't you think that? Sure. So, okay, let me give you the counter view. Trump has been attacked by the deep state in plain sight as much as anybody. They've literally tried to throw him in jail. The system is out for him, and they've tried to kill him. Definitely once, possibly twice. He is obviously against the deep state, and therefore he is our guy.
Well, I don't think the deep state tried to kill him. And also, I don't think they really made, you know, I
Imprison him.
yeah, I mean, I thought that the American deep state would actually do something about Trump. I thought, they can't just let this guy stand for election again and get elected. They're bound to do something. Come on, America, you have a deep state, don't you? Come on, show us what you can do. And from what actually transpired, it became very, very apparent that the American deep state is relatively toothless.
When you say that, you must assume that he's bad for America. Then, in your analysis, must be that he is
Not
bad for America.
not necessarily, because he could accidentally be good for America. Also, I don't think Trump, even though he's a corrupt son of a bitch, I don't think he sees himself as being necessarily that corrupt. I mean, he probably knows he is a bit corrupt, but he probably thinks, you've got to be corrupt. That's how politics works. Blah blah blah. So he probably has a positive view of himself. But the reality is, he is incredibly corrupt. There's a lot of money that's required to keep the Trump operation going, and that money has been flowing very, very liberally from all sorts of essentially quite dubious sources. So that's the way I see it. But yeah, maybe Trump has got behind this MAGA movement, which is inherently, nationalistic in some ways. It has sort of pseudo or semi-nationalistic characteristics. A lot of
America
the
first. Yeah.
a lot of the people who support it and believe in it do see it as a kind of identitarian American movement that wants to limit immigration, and to a certain extent, Trump has to go along with that. He can't go completely against the grain there. That wouldn't work. It would be very messy. We're getting a little bit of a taste of what that would look like with this recent H-1B thing. But Trump's in a position where there is an element of what is sometimes called audience capture. Trump is partly captured by his audience. His audience do want nationalistic policies. They do want certain things. They like tariffs. They want border fences. They want illegal immigrants kicked out. They want less immigrants. They want fewer H-1Bs, things like that. So, and he has to kind of find a way to at least pander to that. But I think to the degree that he can avoid pandering to that, he will.
Okay. Here is a key question for you. Okay. I've just thought of this. Here's a deep question. Is is America first? So the idea of putting America first in the spirit of it, is that isolationism for America, withdrawing back, being more isolationist, or is that actually projecting America's power around the world in, I guess, what would be called more of a neocon sense, and being more interventionist in America's interests around the globe.
Yeah, I mean that is the big question. Um, how can you pursue America's interests in the best way for America? Being an isolationist has certain drawbacks.
Yes.
America is kind of forced to play a big role, but of course, a lot of Americans have never been happy with that. There's always been strong isolationist tendencies in America.
Yeah.
They've always seen the old world, Europe, as a den of vice. They've always seen America as this kind of pure democratic state where people can, worship freely and live their lives as they want. In contrast to Europe, where you had all these tyrannical systems competing with each other, and so, I think if America does become isolationist, it might not be so good for America, because what will happen will be you'll have this kind of radical multipolar world. You'll have China taking over, dominating most of Asia. You'll have Russia reasserting its power. You'll have a disunited Europe. Europe might rise to the challenge. You might get a kind of a more emboldened and weaponized EU. It could lead to a lot of conflict, though, that's for sure, because none of these. The problem with multipolarity is that all these various poles don't always agree where their interests end and the interests of others begin. And the multipolar world, if you want a picture of the multipolar world, then just look at Europe circa 1914. That's kind of what you get.
Yeah. Somebody says in chat, neocons out, replaced by Straussian tech bros, crystal out, Bapsphere in. So it's an interesting take.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, obviously.
Yeah. Okay. I keep getting accused of being a neocon, and I don't know. I don't know if I am. So I tend to think that America's made mistakes in the world, obviously. We have our criticisms with the West. Obviously, there's problems with America. Obviously, current excesses of progressive society aren't ideal for those of us who are here listening right now. We have our own issues with it. But I look around the world and I think, it's like the Luke Ford take. Who would you rather be the leading order? Would you rather it be China? Would you rather it be, I don't know, a Muslim empire? Who would you rather? Point out who you would rather be the global order, and then we can talk about it, I guess. What's your take on that?
Well, it could be, the chance that Britain's been waiting for to rebuild the empire as well, so let's go for it.
British Empire, let's go. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. British Empire 2.0. Yeah.
Let's go, bro. I'm down for that. Okay, what's next on your list?
Okay, right. We're in, let's see, down to March, and moving into April. Let's see. April the 1st. That's when things started to get quite interesting in the Middle East. I think Israel, they bombed the Iranian consulate in Damascus. And that was like a red line for Iran, and they had to really, respond to that forcefully.
Yeah.
And they tried to, hit back with a massive missile strike. And so this was part of something that kept happening throughout the year, this Middle Eastern conflict. There were several stages. There was the ongoing conflict in Gaza with Hamas, which sparked off confrontation between Israel in the north with Hezbollah, which then also sparked off conflict with Syria and with Iran. and that's what happened on April the 1st with the strike on the Iranian consulate, or
Yes.
was it embassy in Damascus? And I think basically Israel succeeded in calling Iran's bluff. And what we saw was that Iran and Hezbollah, who a lot of analysts thought were much stronger, were in fact a lot weaker, and their weapons were not as effective or as dangerous to Israel as previously thought. I mean, going into the year, I thought that Hezbollah had a lot more firepower than they were proved to have later, and I also thought that Iran was in a position to do more damage than it was shown to be able to do, and so Israel called their bluff. It kind of exposed their weakness, and this sort of set the stage for what happened towards the end of the year, which, as you know, was the collapse of the Assad regime, and
Yes.
the kind of total humiliation before that of Hezbollah. And so, Israel is very much, in the driving seat in the Middle East, thanks to the events of 2024.
Yeah, so Colin, what's happened to the great Umar, and why haven't we're always told that at any moment they're going to rise up and go and save the Palestinians or go and give Israel like the final bloody nose or whatever. Where are they?
I guess we have to conclude that the Arabs are pretty useless when it comes to politics or geopolitics or putting up some sort of military resistance. I mean, it basically took an Englishman to sort of get them moving back in the day, with Lawrence of Arabia, and I haven't really seen too much out of them since then.
Yeah, it's pretty shocking. I mean, I know somebody on Twitter who very controversially amongst the DR keeps going around saying that what's it called? Netanyahu is a modern day Caesar.
Yeah, or at least a King Herod.
Okay. Yeah.
I think he's
Yeah.
actually he's having a rather delicate operation as we speak, I believe.
Oh, is he?
Yeah, he's in
He's
for his
pretty old. He's pretty
yeah.
old too.
I think he's 75, and he's in for his prostate operation. So thoughts
Okay.
and prayers, thoughts and prayers.
Yeah. What's your take on the Palestinian situation then? I mean, it's a mess, isn't it? How are they going to? Well, I don't know. Can you give me your take on what's going to happen with Palestine?
Yeah, it's just like it's unbelievable what Israel can get away with now. I mean, they can. I mean, I'm not saying they're not entitled to do this or whatever. I'm not taking a judgmental position on this. My general position is I don't really want to take sides here, but what I notice is
Yeah.
that they're doing things that would have caused a much greater fuss in Western nations before, and this time round, it's like, oh, so what? Tumbleweed. People are not really that bothered by what Israel is doing. They've it's almost like the world's really kind of stopped caring. So all these kind of
Is that true? I mean, there's Netanyahu's been indicted by the International Criminal Court. There's definitely sentiment like on university campuses in America. There's definitely they've definitely lost some soft power over this, surely. I mean, Duvid's going around like, I mean, whatever you think of Duvid, but he's going around like calling it, saying Israel's, it's the biggest mistake they've ever made, and all this.
yeah, but what I'm just not seeing the passion. Before going back 10, 20, 30 years, whenever a few Palestinians got shot or killed for whatever reason, it used to generate much more of an emotional backlash amongst the left in Western countries, and various governments had to really, recognize that in various ways. And the Israelis were a lot less confident about behaving in that way, and so they really kind of were forced to rein themselves in. And I think this time round they've kind of let the dogs off the leash, and they haven't had the normal blowback at all. And so they're getting a sense that they can do anything they like now, because there'll just be a few token notes of protest, but they won't actually change anything. So we're starting to see in this situation another manifestation of the multipolar world. You know, this unipolar world where you had a kind of global order, you had a kind of a global morality, where you had this kind of international cult of human rights. All that has become a bit weaker. And, you know, these local actors, if they have a strong reason to do something, they'll do it, and they don't really have to expect the same kind of moral and emotional, and then finally economic and political blowback that they used to have to put up with.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because if they can get away with it, why can't we get away with it? Like, I mean, in our country, why can't we get away with very milquetoast policies of like just dealing with illegal immigrants?
I was thinking exactly the same thing. You know, if Israel can, you know, blow the fuck out of, you know, wherever, why can't we at least push a few rubber dinghies back to France?
Yeah,
not too much to ask for, is it?
Yeah, I see memes going around like this saying, "Why can't we have this?" So it's interesting, actually. It's where the old, you know, factions of the old alt-right started with, like, you know, we want Israel, but for us, we want a white Zionism, didn't they? Back in the day, I think Richard Spencer even took a line like that at some point.
Yeah, I mean, it looked like Israel under Netanyahu was always kind of on the wrong side of history. There was this kind of global order, human rights, anti-racism, democratic freedoms. You can't keep occupying and oppressing these people in the West Bank, blah, blah, blah. That seemed to be the kind of direction of history. And you could say that Netanyahu was, you know, successful, but he was actually winning on the wrong side of history. And now it kind of almost looks like history's flipped over, and it's a much more kind of multipolar, more brutal world, much more localized kind of world, where if you've got enough power and strength, you can inflict that on, you know, your victims. And other countries far, far away won't really take too much notice of it.
Yeah. Do you put any stock in? You know, I think you've been vaguely aware of Duvid's when he's been on my show and telling me that it's like, I know, apocalyptic and end times prophecy in America. Obviously, they have the strong Zionist lobby, but they also have a lot of Zionist Christians who believe that Israel's existence to the very end of time is like literally important theologically. So they're invested in ensuring that, you know, this happen, that Israel is in place, like, for the end times to happen. Do you think this affects what's going on?
Yeah, there is a constituency in America that believes that, and that's kind of helped this whole process to occur. This process of the deglobalization of morality and this kind of green light to radical Zionism, that does come from that to a certain degree. But it also seems to come from the weakening of the left. The left seems to be a lot weaker than it once was. There's a sense of the left just shriveling up and dying in a lot of places.
Yeah, I know. Brundlefly came on my show and he suggested that we might see AOC leading like some radical anti-Zionist communist coalition in the future that comes back to bite these people for their current crimes.
Yeah, but in the same way that America doesn't feel the need to kind of morally reprimand Israel, I don't think there'll be the political will for them to go over there and prevent Israel doing stuff. So I just see a kind of growing detachment. Of course, Israel can only do what it is doing because it has had a lot of tech and military support from America over the years. I'm not sure if that's likely to continue indefinitely. That's where Israel's soft power and its kind of good image in the world are vital assets, as some people like David were saying. So they might be long term. They could be, storing up problems for themselves. And I also think that what's happened in Syria is not necessarily good for Israel. I always felt that Syria was weaker under Assad because Assad was this representative of this unpopular minority group, and he was also a representative of an incredibly brutal and unpopular regime. And that actually made Syria quite weak because the government was mainly obsessed with controlling its own population. And now you have this relatively popular or at least broad-based leader who's a Sunni Muslim, like 75% of the country. And, he's also got quite strong links with Turkey. And Turkey is one of the few countries in the Middle East that could, give Israel a hard time.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just on Syria, I mean, it all depends on whether you believe this is an organic faction. Do you think they're organic, like they're organic, popular Islamists or whatever who've taken over the country? I know there was talk about them being funded by Israel, promoted. Do you think maybe Israel was just like looking the other way, actively promoting them, or that it's just like I don't know, convenience sake they've looked the other way and just taken the Golan Heights and destroyed the Syrian military, like just in the chaos of the moment?
Well, they've taken full advantage of the chaos, that's for sure.
Yeah,
But
you don't think it was orchestrated by them?
But I don't think it was orchestrated by them. I think they were focused on Assad, Hezbollah, and Iran as the main threat, and so they wanted to support anybody who was against that. But they might now be reconsidering their position and thinking, "Wait a minute, we've actually, shot ourselves in the foot here." I think it's mainly it's mainly a kind of Turkish project. So I think Turkey is the main geopolitical beneficiary. Yeah, never mind.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny how I talked about this with Phil. How he's already talking about opening up an eye surgery in Moscow. It's like okay, moving swiftly on to my next project.
Well, yeah, he was his career as an eye surgeon was rudely interrupted by 25 years as Syrian dictator. So
yes,
he's just getting back to what he's presumably good at or trained for.
Yes. All right, let me just do a couple of these super chats here. Mr. E-Wings said, "Thank you, SJJ and Brutus, for all your hard work in 2024. Happy New Year, Anglo Gang, and all the best for 2025. Well, thank you very much. The Anglo Gang might be on a hiatus, though. It all depends about Brutus's whether he can get time off work. But appreciate that very much. And George says, final guess, Aries. But this is based solely on your phenotype or skull shape.
No, sorry. Yeah, there's still 9 more star signs to plow through, I think.
Well, you can, at a $5 a time, you can keep guessing, George. Go ahead.
Thank you very
much. Thank you very much, everyone. I don't ask for your super chats, but keep them coming. So, what's next on your list, Colin? Oh, you're muted, by the way.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
Yeah, let's fast forward a bit because this year we had a lot of elections.
Oh,
In
yes,
May,
of course. Yep.
we had Geert Wilders. He was quite
Hmm.
successful in Holland.
Yep.
I'm not really sure what's happened in Holland, what sort of coalition they've cooked up. And then, of course, in July, we had the French and the UK elections, which were probably some of the biggest events of the year.
Yes.
And of
Um,
course, our attention was, very much on the UK election and this astounding landslide victory for the extremely unpopular Labour Party.
yes. What is your key takeaway about the UK election? Obviously, the Farage threw his hat in a month before the election day and came away with five MPs. The Conservative Party did terribly. Labour Party kind of limped home in a lot of places, but secured a big majority. What's your takeaway?
Well, I think it reminded us of how low info the voters are. And the British voters were completely crap at tactical voting. And what happened was Labour were not very popular. The combined Reform and Tory vote would have, swept Labour into the gutter. But because British voters are so shit at tactical voting, they just ended up splitting the right wing vote and letting Labour in. And
Yes.
so it was a bit of a mess, really, a bit of a shit show. And it was, there's a lot of question marks and red flags about reform in my view. Nigel Farage is a bit of a dodgy character. GB News is an extremely dodgy channel. That was very much part of the whole campaign. So yeah, we've got this government that nobody really wants, and they have a thumping great
Yeah.
majority.
Yeah, but the Conservative Party didn't deserve it, did they? What would it have been better to like re-elect? I mean, I was arguing for it at the time. I was like arguing, we need to like hold our nose and vote for Rishi Sunak. But truly, in my heart, I didn't believe it. I'm like, these people, fucking useless. It's useless.
Yeah, I mean the Tories, shat the bed with immigration. That's obvious by now, and it is down to this Boris wave thing. And that again was very reactionary because, like,
Yeah.
there was the COVID thing, which that's a whole different debate. But basically, my view, a lot of people's views, were that the British government overreacted and overdid the lockdown.
Yeah.
That
Oh yeah.
they
Oh
they,
yes.
they overdid the furlough.
Oh
They,
yes.
they blew all this money that they didn't have. They created all this
Mm.
debt that they then had to pay off, and
Hmm.
they were almost going to destroy the British economy really through all of
Hmm.
this, funny economics. And that provided the impetus for Boris to try to supercharge the UK economy with mass immigration, taking the doors off the hinges and letting all sorts of people come in here to
Yeah.
work cheaply, to pay for an education, to come over his on health visas, and then end up working as Uber drivers or whatever. And that was just the whole Boris wave, and it was a kind of desperate reaction to the previous desperate overreaction. So the Tories were completely off balance. I mean, the whole Tory party, the whole Tory government has been off balance since the Brexit vote. Really since 2016, and it took them this long to finally get kicked out, and then we've got this completely unsuitable replacement.
Yeah, I think Boris has now admitted as much that the Boris wave was directly due to the threat of a looming economic crisis in the wake of the basically spending all the money on furlough. Basically, they sold the country grandma. My take is, boomers sold the country down the river to get an extra 6 months of life on and decided that the children were going to pay for it, and we had like what do we have 15% inflation for an entire year at one point. I mean, it's just insane.
Yeah, that's
So
politically that's suicide because as much as people don't like immigration, they also hate inflation. They also hate
yeah.
economic downturns, and so
Hmm.
the government's in a kind of difficult position because they're forced to they're forced to deal with the contradictory desires of the voters.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, they're forced to, ensure that the economy is very, very comfortable for most people. But on the other hand, they're also required to clamp down on immigration, and those two things, in lots of ways, are contradictory in the British political and economic system.
Yeah, just on COVID, Luke Ford asked this question. A lot of people, he asks people, how do you rate out of 10 the way your government dealt with COVID? And he gives the government like a 9 or a 10. They did the best that they could at the times with the information they had. They get a score of 9 or 10, 9.5 out of 10 for Luke. What would you give? What would you give the UK government out of 10?
Oh, I don't know. It'd be oh god, 3 to 4. I mean,
Yeah.
I could see what they were trying to do. I could see what they're worried about.
Yeah. Basically being
Um,
beholden to experts. Like, I understand it. You had experts come in, a doctor, and I guess Boris is like, well, if I don't follow the advice of their chief scientist and chief medical officer, well, then it's going to come out later down the line. I overrid it, and if a million people die, they're going to, hang me in Parliament Square.
yeah, and also we didn't really know exactly what COVID was at first. There were a lot of
Yeah.
question marks about how bad it was going to be, how many people would be affected, and so on. And in hindsight, we can say, "Oh, it wasn't that bad," blah blah blah. But at the time, we were going into it blind, so to
Yeah.
speak, and so you've got to give them a little bit for that.
Yeah. That
But now,
second lockdown was a complete travesty, basically. That was basically the Karens of the country that, I don't know, convinced them to do that.
well,
Complete disaster.
we've we shouldn't be surprised. We've had this over feminized harm avoidance society for quite a while now, and that's just what Britain has become under the NHS and so on and so forth. And it's not really a surprise what happened, but interesting consequences anyway.
Yeah. Okay. What's next on your list, Colin?
Let's see. Oh yeah, the French also had an election, didn't they? And I think Marine Le Pen
Yeah.
was doing quite well.
I've completely forgotten about that.
Yeah, Macron was gonna, he wanted to get his house in order. I think before the Olympics,
Right.
and he wanted to show everybody he was still boss, and he was going to. I think he was trying to ride the Olympics a little bit,
Mm.
and it didn't really work out too well. The Front National, they're not called that anymore. They're called the National Rally now. The National
Yeah.
Rally did very well. The far left did very well as so.
Mm.
He
Wait, was
essentially.
this a presidential election
Oh
or
no,
the
this
parliament?
was a no. This was a parliamentary election.
Right. Okay.
And in France, under the French system, the president is the most powerful part of government, but you
Yes.
still need the parliament to pass laws and to keep everything ticking over.
Uh-huh.
And he was hoping to reassert his power, to be the big guy with the Olympic Games and the reopening of Notre Dame later in the year. And it didn't really turn out as he was hoping. And he managed to create a rather unstable
Hmm.
political situation. So that's what France is now mired in. They've had to change their prime minister a few times, and it's very very hard for them to get out of this impasse.
Yeah, what did you think to the French Olympics while we're on the topic of France?
Well, everybody was a bit upset by the
Typically
opening.
French.
Well, there was the opening ceremony. Not just the French. A lot of people in the dissident right were having a fit about this. Rather harmless, over the top French Olympic opening ceremony with all these weird fashion freaks and various kinds of transsexuals. That seemed to trigger a lot of the old boomers in the distant right.
Recreation of the Last Supper, but apparently it wasn't. It was Dionysus or something.
Dionysus. Yeah.
Dionysus. Yeah, I don't know. Satanic conspiracies are from all sides. What's next on your list, Colin?
Well, soon after the incredibly unpopular Starmer government had their incredibly
I know it's coming.
enormous landslide, we had an incident in Southport carried out by a
Welshman.
Welsh Doctor Who enthusiast, apparently. Yes.
Yes. A typical Welshman. So for those who don't know, this was Ruda Cabana something, a second generation Rwandan immigrant who slayed some little girls at a Taylor Swift themed event, right?
Yes. But of course, a lot of people didn't realize that at the time. They were convinced that this was a recent refugee arrival who was a radical jihadi Muslim.
Yeah, well, actually, I mean, it's come out since that he may be a radicalized Muslim. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I've heard that, but he's
Not fresh off
Rwandan.
the boat, but yeah, you're right. There was misinformation put
Yeah.
out about, in fact, like critically for whoever first put it out there, they ended up with a prosecution over it.
Yeah, it's not just like there's different points of view and different bits of information. Some of them happen to be wrong. There's a whole pattern of quickly jumping on this case and using it, weaponizing it to play up the fears and divisions in British society, which are very, very real, of course. And there was this very, very obvious polarization operation going on. There were people who wanted British people to get all worked up about this, to take to the streets, to do all sorts of mad stuff. And this is really what was going on. It was part of this ongoing 4G conflict, in my view.
Isn't it possible that what you say happened, that external forces were pushing this, but also it came from a place of like misguided, but believing that this was best for the country? Like there are elements within the distant right that believe like that we should amplify these things and we should amplify them because that's good. We need to promote these divisions within society, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, but it's just like the way it was done, based on lies, based upon all these people who basically run Russian shill accounts and disinfo accounts. That
Turned
kind
out
of
to be a guy in Pakistan, didn't it, who first put the information out there? I think.
yeah, and there was this weird YouTube channel which used to be a Russian rally car channel, which also promoted the initial lie of it being this mad Muslim with a machete or whatever. But yeah, this is just part and parcel of what's going on in the world today. We have these foreign deep states who use these incidents, which inevitably happen from time to time, and they try to whip it up to create as much chaos and angst as possible. And we saw this going on, and this also explains the government overreaction, because the government is aware of what's going on. They're aware that this unfortunate incident has been weaponized, that it's been used to create some sort of social chaos. And so they came down on it extremely heavily. A lot of people were sent to jail for remarkably long periods of time because Britain's normally a very, very lenient country when it comes to sentencing criminals. And so you saw this sort of iron fist of Starmer, which was also kind of interesting. And a lot of people were very shocked by that, and they thought, "Oh, this proves that we do live in a tyrannical, politically correct, woke, fucking nightmare society." So it played into a lot of people's paranoia.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on the riots themselves? I mean, obviously we disavow people taking violent action. That goes without saying. We're not promoting violent action or anything like that for any of the security services listening or the YouTube terms of service. But to my understanding, a lot of it was actually organic in where it sprouted up. These were real people with real grievances. I spoke at the time. I did some streams here. I'm aware of like a migrant hotel in my local area that's had similar problems, like police turning up at it multiple times. And, I could understand, I've got to be careful I say, I could understand how local areas had tensions around these centres for a long period of time. And then when this particular incident happened, it was like a match that lit a tinder flame, that a tinderbox that had been smouldering for a long time.
Yeah, well, it's true that the government doesn't really pay enough attention to people's concerns on these matters. That has to be said very, very clearly. And also, like I think it was Martin Luther King who said that a riot is basically the voice of the unheard, and that when people riot, then even if it's for stupid reasons, then at least if there has been a riot, the government tends to take things a little bit more seriously than it otherwise would have. And I think, because of that, it's possible that the government might actually be more serious about some of these issues that are raised by illegal migrants coming over and being housed in various hotels in communities that don't really want them, and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of issues in play here. But I mean, it just sort of really emphasizes yet again that Britain's a country of low IQ voters, and it's also a country of low IQ rioters, because a lot of these rioters were very, very naive, and they were misled, and they were actually doing something which could even undercut their own cause. They want certain problems to be addressed. This might be the best way to go about it in a very perverse way, but it could also create negative blowback. So I'm not sure it's ideal.
Yeah, hey, I've got a good question for you. Were you impressed then? You spoke about being unimpressed by the American deep state and their reaction to Trump. Were you impressed by the British deep state's reaction to the riots and how they pulled, in my opinion, a blinder of a move orchestrated with the media and with the anti-racism protests to basically crush the rioting spirit with this faux presentation of organized resistance to it and an anti-racism presence on the streets?
Well, it was successful, but I think the riots were not really that strong to begin with. I mean, it was mainly people in certain parts of the country, a certain type of person who was looking for a bit of excitement. So yeah, but I mean,
do you remember that unified media presence on the following day though? That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that does go on. I mean, Britain, there is more of a deep state feel about Britain than there is in America. And the BBC's a big part of that as well. I mean, the BBC's always there in the background, trying to get everybody to calm down and be nice to each other and get along and accept each other and be inclusive. And it plays this kind of coddling nannying role with this very fractious and divided society that Britain's created.
Yes, definitely. I definitely think the British deep state orchestrated that, and it worked. It worked. We went from thinking Britain might be on the verge, naively, of I don't know, revolutionary fervour to let's hold hands and sing "Kumbaya" within a week. So
I
anyway,
mean,
well, what's yeah.
I think the British deep state can they can pull out the stops when they need to. Still, that's what we saw there.
Yes. And is that actually, before we move on, is that necessarily a bad thing for? Would you argue that's actually a good thing for societal cohesion? That a state needs, whether we disagree with it or not, that a state needs to do that. That is
Well, I
integral.
can see the logic of it, but a lot of the people in the dissident right, the point they want to make is that these societies are inherently fractious and divided and fragile and unstable, and therefore, it's probably a good thing when things go wrong. But you can see the logic of the government wanting to maintain law and order, which we fully
Yes.
endorse, of course.
This is a law and order stream, 100%. Okay, Colin, what's next on your list then?
Right. So yeah, moving into August and September, we started to see the American election taking up more and more media attention. And I'm not sure when Joe Biden was given the elbow. Do you remember roughly when that was?
Oh, yes, because I was in America, right? So it was July. I was in America. I flew home July the 4th, right? And I watched the debate between Trump and Biden whilst I was in an American hotel room. So that was the trigger point for everybody to say this guy is senile. So it was like a few weeks after that. So sometime in July.
Yeah, so that threw the Democrats into crisis mode, and they
Yes.
thought, "Oh no, we can't go up against Trump with this guy. What can we do? How can we yank him out and put somebody else in?" And so there was a sort of there was a debate, a short debate about whether they should get somebody completely new and different, or whether they should just put Kamala Harris in. And of course, they eventually just put Kamala Harris in because she had a certain amount of legitimacy because she had been running with Biden already. So they could say that the votes which were cast for Biden in the primaries were actually also cast for her. So they kind of thought that would be easier to explain to people rather than like suddenly redoing the whole thing. And so they got this completely unsuitable candidate, Kamala Harris, and they she teamed up with this guy Waltz, I remember, who was some sort of
Yes.
sports coach from the Midwest, to kind of balance the ticket, as they always do in America. And that was the American election campaign.
Yeah, look, whatever. People came to me and said Trump isn't trying to win this thing. I saw entirely the opposite. I saw a Trump that was like on the campaign trail, sometimes twice a day, but at least every day in another different location, another state. There did seem to be a mass popular support for Trump. I do think there was a little bump for Kamala Harris, the brat wave. I think was real in a weird way, but yeah, it never really got going, right?
Yeah, it seemed like
Just too unlikable.
yeah, it just seemed like a whole kind of gaslighting campaign, really. Like they were trying to make us all believe this woman was incredibly charismatic and interesting and exciting and youthful and vibrant and blah blah blah. It was always, like gaslighting on steroids, really. And I just was looking at this campaign in utter disbelief, because Trump wasn't. He didn't look very good either. He looked like this old tired ADHD boomer to me. He was rambling on in these interminable speeches that he was giving to people with an increasing number of empty seats at the back, and he just seemed to be going through the motions and then venting all these bullshit. And I just thought, is this really the barnstorming campaign that's going to sweep the nation? And so you had these two completely dysfunctional crap campaigns going head to head. It was worse than Democracy, that movie where they go far into the future and everybody's a total moron. It was actually worse than that.
Yeah, here's Gen Z, White Guys for Harris, right here. Look. Totally organic, of course.
Yeah, cringe. So yeah.
Okay.
But then but of course, I think the Trump campaign got a shot in the arm, really, from these assassination attempts, so to speak.
Yes.
That one incident where Trump we still don't know what happened to his ear, do we? We still don't know what happened to his ear. Apparently, the bullet hit his ear, and a streak of blood went across his face. And he rose up and he raised his fist, and the American flag was blowing in the background. And it was
You're not saying it's too good to be true, are you? I know somebody who was, by the way, we've got to be careful. I know somebody who lost their channel saying that it was too good to be true. That let's just leave it at that.
I just thought, oh no, we're living in the simulation when that happened.
It's definitely cinematic. Looking back on it, oh my god.
Yeah, it's just simulation level of reality, really. Yeah. But that did give him a shot in the arm. And then, of course, there was the just before Election Day, just to leap ahead briefly to November, there was that ridiculous Iowa poll which came out. And apparently Kamala Harris was incredibly popular in the state of Iowa, which is a deep red state.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And I just thought that's got to be fake. That's complete bollocks. And, so there was just a whole fakeness to the electoral process in America.
Yeah. In fact, actually, Colin, now you reminded me about that poll. It's the one thing that I have against, that two-way podcast that Luke Ford put everybody on to with Mark Halperin. It's a good normie political show. But his opinion, Mark Halperin, is that she was completely legit and that she just made a mistake, and don't buy it.
Nah, I don't buy it. I think money changed hands. It doesn't look like this.
I think Trump even believes it. I think he's filed a lawsuit, hasn't he?
Yeah, hopefully something will come out, and we'll say, "Aha, we were right." Yeah, that is election interference. That was that's. Absolutely. But again, this is the pathetic shallowness of the American deep state. It's just not very deep. I mean, if it was Russia, they would polonium. That would be the end of fucking Trump. They put polonium in his Diet Pepsi.
God forbid, disavow, obviously.
I know, but that's exactly the sort of thing a real deep state would do.
Yeah.
But the American deep state, I don't know, they cook a fake.
That's why he eats from McDonald's.
Yeah.
Because he buys 12 Big Macs and mixes them up and takes one of them on Trump Force One.
He's that
poison
nervous. Them all. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like the American version of Putin doubles.
Yes. Hey, do you give any weight to that? Do you believe that there's 3 or 4 Putins what wandering around?
Yeah, I think it seems reasonable. It's the sort of thing the Russians would do, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Get some little Asian guy, balding Asian guy, and give him some plastic surgery.
yeah, they do look slightly different, but yeah, I don't know. It's just
Yeah.
it's
All right.
weird.
What's next on your list?
Well, let's see now. Let's move into well. There's all sorts of other things that I could mention. I mean, there was the Tenet Media thing that came out in September.
Oh yeah.
That was quite good because people
Did you
like
feel
us.
vindicated, Colin, when that came out? Bet you
Not
did,
really.
right? No.
Not really, because there had been all sorts of other vindications along the way.
I know, but the DR and like half of my audience hear guys like you talking about Russian interference, and I say tell it like this, that we were all vaccinated basically against believing in Russian interference with that piss dossier, because people heard about that and they thought the Democrats are pushing this. This is all bullshit, and now I'm not going to believe a word of Russian interference again. But it's a few people like you, and various others who've continued to say no, it is a real phenomenon, and then it finally comes out.
Well, I thought it was like a convenient reference point whenever I want to actually make this point that, by the way, did you know the Russians are doing this, that, and the other? And then, of course, people don't believe you. Then you have to provide evidence. And this is a
Yeah.
very convenient piece of evidence that, it has a big footprint. A lot of people know about it. People know who Tim Pool is. They know roughly what Tenet Media is. It's well documented. So there you go. There's the Russians up to their dirty tricks. And
Yes.
this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's lots of other things we can't really, smoking gun prove, but they're going on anyway. I mean, look at Tucker Carlson. Look at the way he behaves, going out to Russia, interviewing Putin, putting this guy Marta Maid on his Twitter platform. This synergy with X, it's all circumstantial, and it's not exactly smoking gun, but obviously there's a lot of stuff which is not out in the open, but it's definitely exactly the same thing.
Yeah. But didn't you see all the different types of bread they had in that Moscow supermarket? I mean, it was amazing.
Yeah, it was like Aldi on a good day, wasn't it?
And you can put a pound in the shopping trolley as well. Amazing. Anyway, well, what's next? What's next on your
Well,
list?
let's see now. Of course, we had this very, very, thanks to the election in the UK, we had this extremely long and drawn out and very anticlimactic Tory party leadership contest.
Yes. Took
Finally,
forever.
it finally produced its
Produce the best leader possible.
it sort of it finally produced
It,
this stupendous result in November. That's how long it took. It was going on for months and months, and
yeah.
they had about, I think, was it about 8 people threw their hat into the ring, and then the MPs went through them and voted them down to the final two, and we had this guy Jenrick
Yes.
and this incredible woman, Miss Badenoch.
Yes.
And of course, one of the problems the Tories had was that a lot of their top talent had been wiped out by the election, and so we had an interesting situation where these politicians who had been in these who had managed to survive this nuclear blast by being representatives of these incredibly safe seats were the only ones that were left. And so Kemi
Yes.
Badenoch was definitely one of those. She was in an extremely safe Tory seat. So when the Labour landslide came, she was one of the few to survive the deluge. And this is kind of interesting because people like Kemi Badenoch were initially put into incredibly safe Tory seats, because if you put them into a marginal Tory seat, that would have been a sure way to actually lose the seat in an election. And this was all part of the kind of David Cameron diversification strategy. So back in the 2010s, or even earlier, actually, David Cameron, it was actually in the zeros, David Cameron started to do this, I think. So he decided that the thing to do was to introduce more diversity into the Tory party at the Member of Parliament level. And so he decided the Tory party needed more ethnic people, it needed more women, it needed more gay people, etc. But all of these groups are a little bit unpopular with the Tory voters. So in order to diversify the party, they all had to be put into extremely safe Tory seats, and that's why we were faced with this election between Kemi Badenoch and what's his name, Jenrick.
Yes. Yeah. Kemi is a weird one. I mean, please don't confuse her with her ethnic enemies, the Boko Haram. She is Yoruba. Okay. Don't get this confused. Yeah.
Yeah, and she's also, interestingly, she's actually a literal anchor baby.
She is. She grew up in Nigeria for 16 years, but her mother had her here.
Yeah, they actually came to the UK on purpose because
Oh, really?
I think it was like back in the 80s, was it sometime in the
Yeah.
1980s, and the British government was actually going to change the law to make it more difficult for people to get citizenship just by being born in the UK.
Yes.
And they knew that change in the law was going to come, so they rushed over to the UK with this baby in her mother's stomach, and popped her out, and picked up a free British passport in the process. So that's what you could do back in the day.
Well, maybe they're not as stupid as they look. I mean, smart move, really.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of quite clever and intelligent Nigerians. It's just that they often put it to not necessarily the most altruistic use.
Yeah. You know what? Growing up in Nigeria for 16 years, though, that has got to make you quite un-English in your... I mean, these are your foundational years. Sure, you can take on the trappings of another culture later on in your adult life, but 16 years, growing up your entire childhood in Nigeria. Wow.
Well, there's quite a lot of people who grew up in Africa. There's of course Elon Musk, and is it Peter Thiel, and
No.
yeah,
Elon Musk is a real African American.
definitely, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But anyway,
All right,
we're stuck with Kemi. I thought that was an interesting choice. I'm not really sure how she managed to get elected by the members.
Yes.
I mean, I assumed that the members would be a bit old fuddy-duddy, and they wouldn't really want to have a ultra woke-looking black Nigerian anchor baby as their leader. But I guess
someone told me all the based members basically left the party because of like the election and everything. So
I think that's part of the picture. I also think there's a lot of old boomers in the Tory party, and they're a little bit behind the curve, and they still think that's what you have to do. You've got to be woke. You've got to vote for the black person.
okay.
So there's a kind of like an old boomer kind of reflex mixed in there as well.
There's probably a phenomenon of I am racist and therefore I will vote for the black person to prove I'm not as well, isn't there?
That's it. That's the boomer reflex right there.
Yes. Okay. Right. Yeah. Got it.
So she benefited from that. Jenrick, he wasn't really a great candidate either. He kind of lacks charisma. He didn't have much of a vibe about him. And all the other more charismatic, contenders had been wiped out in the election. So the Tory party have got probably the worst possible leader for what they have to do, because right now their main problem is they're in the process of being politically replaced. This is the great replacement of British politics almost.
Yeah.
And their main enemy is not the Labour Party or anybody else. Their main enemy is reform. They've got to show these voters who are concerned about immigration, who are concerned about multiculturalism, that they can fight back and they can do something about it. And so they've got to be a little bit more right wing than reform. And they're going to struggle to deliver that message with a black Yoruba anchor baby. So structurally, the Tory party just looks like a contradiction in terms. This party is going to stop immigration. Really? Look at the leader. You know what I mean? It just doesn't make any kind of sense to people, to the average low information British voter who doesn't like all the multiculturalism that's going on. So
it was like a gift to Nigel Farage, Kemi getting in.
Yeah, because with a proper leader, in due course, the Tories would probably, in the course of a unpopular Labour Parliament, reassert themselves.
Yes.
But now that's not really guaranteed anymore. It looks like this could actually keep the instability of the Tories going, the lack of support, the bleeding of support from the Tories to reform may well continue. There'll be more defections. There'll be more people joining reform. Reform have recently had this thing where they've claimed to have more members than the Tory party. It's very, very believable. The Tory party doesn't really have that many members. And so, it looks like we could be heading into a situation where the oldest and most successful political party in the world could be in its death throes.
Yes, they're in shambles, absolute shambles. I mean, I have watched some of Prime Minister's questions since Kemi's taken office, and the striking thing about it is that she cannot make the argument. It's almost like a structural problem. It's not just her, but she stands up at the dispatch box and she can not make the argument about immigration. The moment they open their mouths about immigration, Starmer says, well, you're responsible for it. How dare you? You people have done it all, and you're here to tell me about immigration. And so it's now like it's a structural failure. So now every time they get up at the dispatch box, they've got to be aware, I can't really talk on this topic, so I'm going to but yet this is the topic that I'm being outflanked by reform by. So it's almost like it's like checkmate for them. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's just for the high information voters. For the low information voters, the optics tell you that the Tory party is not exactly the party of white Britain, blah blah blah, whatever. So I don't know. It's just a complete shit show, but it's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Okay. What's next on your list, Colin?
Right. So Kemi. Right. Oh yeah. Going back to October, Alex Salmond kicked the bucket.
He did. He did another heart attack. Couldn't see that coming.
Not from the look of him. Yeah, he looks so healthy.
Yes.
Yeah, that was a bit weird. Anyway, yeah. And also, yeah, what happened in Scotland was we had a few changes of Scottish First Minister. So, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think the nationalists are not, the Scottish nationalists are not dead yet. I mean, they're actually top of the polls in Scotland because Labour are unpopular. The Tories are also unpopular. And even though the SNP are unpopular, they're less unpopular than the other two. So,
The SNP, I've never understood it, Colin. I still don't understand it to this day. Is it just like because it's anti-English sentiment and it doesn't matter about their politics, or are they genuinely popular because of their like radical left-wingism?
Well, the it's a number of things, Like first of all, Scotland did become a bit left wing in the Thatcher years for various reasons, like post-industrial reasons, and so Scotland's kind of swung to the left. But even though Scotland swung to the left, England didn't necessarily swing to the left, and so the English voters forced Scottish voters to live under conservative governments. So that kind of created an impetus for breaking away to create a more socialist society, because they couldn't do that as part of the United Kingdom. But there's other things involved in Scottish politics as well, which people might not be aware of. There's a large kind of Irish community, or people of Irish descent, let's say. There's even
The Irish question.
a large number of crypto Hibernians, as I call them.
Yes.
And they generally just hate the Union. They just hate Britain. They just see us as the bad guy. We took away their potatoes or something. And that always is a major component of the SNP's support. The SNP also unify the anti-unionist vote, whereas the Labour, Conservatives and Lib Dems kind of divide the pro-unionist vote. So that gives the SNP a certain amount of power, because they're the only force that's anti-unionist. And so they get all the support that or on a two-way split from that particular question. And then there's other things as well, but
Colin, what the heck was the British deep state up to, allowing a vote on Scotland leaving the Union of the UK?
That was David Cameron, who was quite fond of referendums. You see, because when David Cameron came in as Prime Minister...
Yeah, but they're a risky thing. I mean, what if that had gone the other way?
I mean, David Cameron, he came to prominence during this. What was it? Was this? It was a 13-year period of Labour dominance, and the Conservatives had several leaders who failed to catch on with the voters. And David Cameron, he was obsessed with reasserting the Conservative Party, and it was at the time it seemed very, very hard to do. The voters weren't interested, and when he finally managed to become Prime Minister in 2010, it was with a very slim coalition majority.
Yes,
and so he was essentially he was in a very weak position when he became Prime Minister, and so he had a threat from all over. He had a threat from the right, from UKIP at the time. He also had a threat from the left, because the Lib Dems were eating into Tory support, and so his way of dealing with this very weak position was to use referendums. That's why he called the referendum on EU membership. That's why he called the referendum on Scottish nationalism. So he was trying to put the whole thing to bed, to make it a non-issue.
Yeah.
And so
he succeeded with Scottish nationalism, because thankfully we didn't give it away.
It was extremely close, though. It was very, very close, and they had to resort to all sorts of blackmail and threats to make sure that people didn't vote for it.
Yeah, well, do you think the deep state will ever allow a vote to happen on Scotland again?
Well, My view is that Britain doesn't really have a very deep state, and so
Right.
they're limited in what they can do. But yeah, they seem to be trying to close it off as an issue. That's probably one of the reasons they set up this Supreme Court, because they thought probably we're going to have to adjudicate our way out of a lot of tricky corners in the years ahead.
Yeah. Are you pro Scottish independence or anti? Do you believe in the union?
Well, at the time of the referendum, I was kind of more or less in favour of it, but not for the usual reasons. I thought that if Scotland became independent, it would be forced to evolve away from left wing politics out of necessity, because left wing politics wouldn't work. And so they'd have to, get their act together, so to speak. And also, it would, before the kind of left wing bias of Scotland used to deliver about 50 Labour MPs to the British Parliament. And so Scotland had the effect of pushing the United Kingdom further to the left as well.
That's
So
interesting. Yeah.
so for those reasons, I was kind of in favour of it in a weird way.
Yeah, it's a national security risk, though, isn't it? Because our nuclear subs come from Scotland, right?
Well, I think England definitely needs Scotland in the Union. Without Scotland, England looks like I don't know, third-rate country, really. It looks smaller, it looks weaker, the brand is a lot less potent. Militarily, it raises a lot of, like you just mentioned, serious questions. Would Britain be able to maintain its seat on its permanent member of the Security Council seat in the United Nations? Probably not, So England would, on its own, or United Kingdom without Scotland, would be in a much weaker position in terms of soft power and image and brand and, geopolitics.
What about Northern Ireland? Can we do without that?
That's not really as important, but yeah. I mean, what do we really need Northern Ireland for? I'm not really sure, but it's still there somehow, miraculously.
Yeah. It created an awful mess over Brexit. I mean, I don't think anybody ever. I didn't see that thing coming about that border there with the European Union, on the island of Ireland. They never talked about that in the lead up to Brexit, and then it all became a shit show afterwards.
Yeah, that was it was a nightmare, wasn't it? That went on for years and years, and British politics seemed to be in some sort of weird Groundhog Day kind of nightmare. Every day we're waking up and it's this thing again.
Yes.
Can we get Brexit done? Blah blah blah.
It actually sent people crazy. I have first experience of this. There's an old lady in my street. God bless her, she's passed on now. Right, but during the Brexit time, she had like early stage dementia. This is a true story, God's honest truth. For an entire year and a half or 2 years, right, every few days she'd come walking around the street, knocking on doors, asking people, what does Brexit mean? Because it was so ubiquitous on the television, and we'd have to explain it to her. Oh, it's just something to do with politics. You don't have to worry about it. And she'd go, oh, okay. And like we'd take her home, and she'd go back. And then a few days later, she'd be walking around the street, knocking on doors again. What does Brexit mean?
Well, Brexit means getting all our immigrants from the third world instead of Eastern Europe. But that would probably.
Yeah.
Sorry, that would probably have happened anyway, because I think a lot of these Eastern European countries aren't as poor as they used to be.
Yeah, you can joke by her, Ray, but what actually had happened is that the carers who come to see her had to print out laminated posters and put them on the back of her house door and on their gate saying, Brexit is to do with politics. You don't need to worry about it.
Yeah, I think it's the kind of Vlad Vlexer depoliticization of British politics. I mean, a lot
Are
of
you
people just
Brexit?
got. I mean, a lot of people just got really turned off by it after a while. They just didn't care, and that's really. We
Yeah.
sort of voted for this madman Boris on the basis of that, just to get it ended.
Yes. Are you a Brexit regretter, Colin?
Um, Not really. I've got mixed feelings about it, to be honest. I think Britain is going to struggle in the world on its own. Being the kind of country it is, with its inherent
Yeah.
divisions, with its aging population, with its kind of rather moribund economy, and but on the other hand, um, it gives us a certain freedom to be more radical, and it brings a lot of things into sharper focus. I mean, Britain was getting by on all this kind of invisible immigration from the EU, and that wasn't really healthy, and that wasn't really a good way to run the country. And since the UK's left the European Union, this kind of addiction to immigration has become a lot more blatant and obvious, and so it's forcing people to at
Yes.
least face the issue in a much more honest and forthright way. So, in a way, there's a good side and a bad side, really. I have to say.
Yes. Should we leave the European Court of Human Rights? And the argument against this is that we look like basically only Russia, Russia and Belarus have done this, and so do we want to look like pariahs of human rights around the world, in Europe?
Well, we could say that we're leaving because nobody would ever think that Britain was a country that was against human rights, because basically we kind of more or less invented them.
Yeah. All right, Colin. What's next on your list? So,
Well, I think we're almost into December now. We've got
yeah.
let's see, Trump's U-turn on crypto. That's November, and then we have his election, and we have the H-1B Musk versus MAGA
Okay. We're
controversy,
we're here. We're up to date.
which must be a little bit hard for you to take, because you've always prided yourself on being a big fan of Elon Musk.
Well, it is a little hard to take. I'll be honest. People are coming at me saying, "Are you going to disavow him?" Obviously, and well, what's your take on it?
Well, I think people should be against it. I think H-1B. This is. I'm not really sure. I was how many people are affected, but I heard that there's a kind of a number cap, but that a lot
It's
of
85,000
yes, but I heard that
capped.
a lot of people go find ways to go way over the cap.
Right.
And so it's like one of these things, like in Britain, we have these like health visas and student visas, and they're ridiculously abused to bring in all sorts of other people that nobody intended to bring in. And I think the H-1B is a bit like that. I haven't actually looked into it in enough detail, but that's what I'm hearing. And so it's a big thing. A lot of people come in. I mean, sure, some of them are qualified, but essentially it is about big American companies being a bit selfish, wanting to have more of a whip hand over their workers, and so I think people are MAGA is right to be against it, to kick up a fuss. America's a massive country. It's got about 350 million people. This year, the tech companies have been shedding staff by the tens of thousands. There must be enough qualified people out there to fill almost any vacancy in these tech companies. So, the only question is they don't really want to pay the going rate, it seems. And so this is why these tech bros are really all in on this, and this is why Elon Musk is all in on this. And so, yeah, I think people should be less trusting of these kinds of backdoor arrangements. And even if they don't fully understand it, they should just go with their instinct. And their instinct is like, come on, we've had enough immigration. Let's start clamping down. So good for them.
Yes, I can see it, and I hate, by the way, to be put in this position of defending Elon Musk. I'm just telling you how I think his position is basically, look, he's probably part of a god complex. He probably thinks, look, I just won you the election. I just bought this election for you, right wing. You're ungrateful bastards, and we have an immigration problem that is, when you add it up, I asked Grok, it's 2.6 million legal immigrants per year and an estimated 1.5 million illegal immigrants. That's a total of 4.1 million people. The H-1B visas, if you go by the numbers, account for less than 100,000. So Musk is like, we need these people for the economy. This is like 100,000 out of 4.1 million. You're all stupid. He's like, you're all stupid because he's not an ethnonat. He's like, you're all stupid. We need to get the economy on track. And this is such a tiny fraction of it that I can't believe you're going to war against us over this like tiny fraction of skilled labor that we need, and you're an impediment to like the American economy succeeding if you do this.
Yeah, but I mean, the American economy is relatively strong at the moment. It's not doing too badly. I think Europe's struggling, Germany's struggling. Without their cheap Russian gas. There's problems in China with their ridiculous property market and trying to create some sort of stimulus to get things moving again. So I think the American economy is relatively strong. It should be able to spread the money around and pay people a bit more. These tech companies are constantly finding ways to get rid of people. Every year, there's more and more jobs that can be discarded and replaced by automation of various forms. We're going to really see a lot of that as AI kicks in more and more. So I don't think it's the ideal time to start stapling H-1B visas to diplomas and all sorts of other things that they're talking about. I think it's now is a good time. I think it's a perfect moment for America to start clamping down. Not too radically maybe, but at least more than they have been doing.
Yeah. Do you believe in free markets, Colin?
Well, I think everything's a tool. Some things will be useful in certain situations, and therefore they should be employed, and in other situations, other systems and methods should be used. And I don't think America should just be determined by market forces. I think you want to create a country that has some sort of unified culture, some kind of unified sense of itself, and they haven't been doing a very good job of that in the last few decades. People are starting to think it's all a bit meaningless. They're starting to lose their sense of who they are.
Milton Friedman once said, a major source of objection to a free economy is precisely that it gives people what they want instead of what a particular group thinks they ought to want. Underlying most arguments against the free market is a lack of belief in freedom itself. When I saw this, I thought of what you say about how, we talk about birth rates and why people aren't having babies, and that basically these are the choices of Western women and Western couples today based on the freedom to choose. And what do you say about all this?
Yeah, it's not the Jews, it's people in developed Western societies with a lot of individual freedom and feminism and equal rights for women.
Hmm.
They will live a certain type of life, and that certain type of life will, push demographics in a essentially a suicidal direction. So you can't
Hmm.
allow, if people are using their freedom to kill themselves, you can't really allow them to be free, essentially. And so collectively, that's what freedom does for us. And by allowing people to, live the kinds of lives that they want to choose to live, you're effectively
Hmm.
creating a dysgenic society. And so at some point, something will have to change in a direction that does not align with absolute individual freedom.
Yes. Yeah. Do you see any solution to the birth rate problem? I mean, we're at 1.44 here in the UK. That is reducing. If my maths is right, that's us reducing by a quarter per generation.
Yes, yes. When you have 1.4, let's see, you're losing about 30% of your population per
Mm.
generation, on generation.
Yeah,
And so,
that's
yeah,
a death spiral by definition, right?
it's not as bad as South Korea, thank goodness, but yeah, it's pretty bad. Um, will it? What can change it? I mean, there are reasons why the fertility rate is that low.
Hmm.
There are a lot of reasons actually. There's people mentioned all sorts of things. I actually had a piece on Neocrat where I went through them in some detail, called "Why is Britain Dying and How Can It Be Saved?"
Hmm.
And basically, let's see, I've got a list here. These are reasons for poor fertility. Number one, career prioritization, which mainly means women want to have careers and find something self-fulfilling in the workplace. Number two, delay in parenthood. People want to have they want to have their nice house, money in the bank, etc., before they start having kids. Three, smaller families. So even people who successfully reproduce and have families, they don't want to have too many kids for various reasons. Sometimes it just looks bad to have like 10 kids.
Hmm.
People think you're weird if you have a lot of kids. But also there's practical reasons for that as well. Like not having enough room and so on. And it's quite stressful looking after young children. So if you're doing that for a couple of years, it's not too bad. But if you're doing that for 10 to 15 years, it might get a bit trying. Number four, urbanization. People are too urbanized today. This creates high rents, small living spaces, and also creates lots of things to, lots of different ways for people to kind of achieve social fulfillment. So they don't need to socially fulfill themselves by creating a healthy family. They can find social fulfillment in other things and
Hmm.
various activities which are readily available in an urban environment. Number five, economic uncertainty. We've had quite a lot of economic uncertainty, although modern Western countries are extremely rich, and probably, in most cases, they've never been richer. Life has never been easier. There has been a lot of economic uncertainties about the economy and what kind of jobs people might be doing, the housing market, and so on and so forth. Number six, alternative forms of sexuality, things like promiscuity, virtual sex, masturbation, things like that.
Hmm.
Number seven, health issues. There's a lot of obesity, a lot of damage from drinks and drugs, sexually transmitted diseases, etc. So these are all factors that are, routinely cited as causes of, low fertility. And you can take each one head on and try to figure out a solution, and that's kind of where the article goes.
When you put it all like that, it doesn't seem like there is a very obvious solution. It's like we're in an absolute fucking dire mess, and there's all these contributing factors.
Well, they're all
And
interlinked as well. These factors. So it's not just one thing by itself that has this toxic effect. It's all these interlinking factors which all kind of work in the same direction. And I think the thing is that people didn't even have any consciousness about this until quite recently. This is the thing. I'm starting to see a lot more consciousness of this. I mean, people didn't even talk about demographics. They didn't even talk about fertility rates. I mean, I started to notice this like decades ago. I was very aware of this. This is one of the things that kind of pushed me into the the alt-right at the time, and internationalism and things like that. It was an awareness of demographics, fertility rates, and the inevitable effect that this would have. But other people, it was like the last thing on their minds. And in the last few years, I've seen that change quite a lot. I've seen this become much more of an issue, much more mainstreamed. So I think we're sort of, in consciousness terms, it's becoming a thing, at least.
yeah, with how the economy works, if we had a shrinking population, isn't that almost certainly going to be a lead to a recession? And therefore, by definition, we have to have growth on a constant basis. And so we are hooked up to this tap of foreign labour and effectively replacement population coming in, whether we like it or not.
Not necessarily, because also I think there's also quite a lot of economic change happening. The economies of the world are mutating in quite interesting ways, I think. So we're in many places we're switching to much more of a kind of green, ecological type of economy, where we put much more emphasis on renewable power and recycling and things like that. And so we are starting to a certain degree, wean ourselves off this kind of endless growth cycle kind of economics. And also, we're starting to see more automation. We're starting to see a lot of jobs disappear. And, we've got this new thing on the horizon, AI, which is really coming to focus in the last year or two.
Yes.
And that could really get rid of a lot of jobs. And hopefully most of the jobs it will get rid of will be jobs done by women. And then they'll be forced to go back to the kitchen, back to the bedroom, back to the kindergarten, whatever, So hopefully AI will solve this problem.
Or at least work from home. I mean, this is this is actually a pot promise. Really, surely the promise, was it you who made this point? Also, I forget who made this point. I never thought of it. The thing that COVID taught us is that women could stay at home and still earn some money, and we really need to just make this actually happen. We need, we can't really tell women you can't have jobs because we need you to be breeding factories. The nation needs babies, but surely women can do more working from home. This could be a middle way.
Well, we want them to have jobs that don't fulfill them. So if they have less fulfilling jobs, they have less exciting careers, then they'll find the career of motherhood possibly more attractive. So women should be limited to just general skivvying jobs, doing a bit of tidying up here and there, cleaning jobs, working down the calf, We don't want them to be high-powered executives jetting around the world, having exciting, interesting careers.
Yeah, but the toothpaste out of the tube already with that, isn't it? And I mean, we're not going to get women to vote away their right to work.
Yeah, I mean, if Who knows? Anyway, but
Yeah.
if, if,
Colin.
if, if things
go.
don't sort themselves out through chance and circumstance, then we'll have to come up with some more radical solutions, which we can talk about some other time.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I asked Colin to do 1 hour with me tonight, and we've done 2.5 hours. So, ladies and gentlemen, Colin's links are in the description. I've already had his website up on up on the stream. In fact, there's a good YouTuber who gets posted occasionally on here, and so people actually accuse you of being my boss. There's like there's an episode right there, and another one right there. I don't know how these get on there, but this website is Colin's blog, neocrat.blogspot.com. Link in the description, as well as the YouTube channel where he uploads stuff about his articles or his short pods. So that is here, Neocrat YouTube channel also linked in the description, and of course his X profile. So make sure that you sub to all things Colin. Colin, I think you have concluded SJJMAS 2024. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, it's been great, SJJ. I think you've really set a new marker in the live streaming world with this series, and I'm looking forward to the next 10 years of SJJMASs. See what happens, see how big your head gets.
Let's go. It's on everybody to keep me grounded, okay? That's the contract that I am having with you lot. All right. Merry Christmas, everyone, and let the curtain fall. Good night, everyone.